Hi, I wish we could be together in person, but it's a pleasure to be here with you, whatever we have to do to make it work. I'd like to read you some excerpts from my novel, Out of Place. It's set during the days leading up to and in the aftermath of 9/11. And I think I'll start with the first page. There's a number of intersecting storylines in the book, but the first page is kind of a roadmap to one of the main storylines. Here goes. Yes, my name is Rennie Mulcahy. I don't know why I'm here. I'm quite sure MNA isn't a terrorist, and I do not hesitate to say so, though how can anyone ever be sure? The reasons I liked her to begin with, the reasons I'm loyal to her now could, of course, be interpreted differently as evidence she was up to no good. You suspect she was after something, passwords, files, the inside track on budget allocations. Or you might see she simply recognized that I was, as she was, lonely. Emily became my friend. She commented, yes, on the decadence of the West, but so did I. I like to think it was my cleverness that appealed to her, not my access. What's my point? If you want to believe that a nice Jewish girl from Istanbul is married to a nice Muslim boy, that a well-educated doctor who loves his wife would leave her in order to schlep around India with some deprived, diseased nomads, that India has such a powerful animal rights movement that the government is confiscating the dancing bears, and that the only place in the world to buy a brown bear cub to replace the one that's been confiscated is in Peshawar. If you want to believe all that, what is there to stop you? My point is, Emily's husband, Oz, has done nothing, absolutely nothing wrong, if you want to believe all that. And I do. So Rennie is the office manager at the Desert Haven Institute in the Mojave Desert. And most of the scientists working there are there in the US on visas because they're all foreign nationals, which of course makes them suspect. And if you've ever been a secretary or an executive assistant, and I plead guilty to this myself when you think you know more than the boss, right? Well, that's Rennie, and she's always gone around bragging that nothing happens around here without me. I'm the only one who knows what's really going on. And that bragging is what lands her to being interrogated in federal custody. But right now, instead of following that narrative track that Rennie's just laid down for us, I would like to introduce another one of the scientists at the Institute. Maria Castillo had a special love for rattlers. The red diamond rattlesnake, a regular pacifist, would back off rather than strike. The Santa Catalina rattler was evolving to lose its rattles. It would strike without warning. She got a kick out of the hocico de puerco, pig snout rattler, its black diamonds outlined in almost fluorescent green. She loved the rattlesnakes of her country, Mexico, even though she loved her native earth even more, and it was because of the snakes she'd had to leave. Desert Haven, though, was okay. Natural habitat to the Mojave rattlesnake, the most venomous in the United States. From her collecting trips, she brought back 4 species and assured Karski the room would be kept locked at all times, and each glass cage would have a lock on the perforated steel lid. She wanted to map the rattlesnake genome, she told Emine and Rennie. Compare pacifist rattlers to the most aggressive. Were they hardwired, or did something in the environment affect enzymes, hormones? Talk about dual use, said Emine. You'll find the key to turn a violent person peaceful, but it could also be used to turn a pacifist into a killer. They already figured out how to do that, said Rennie. It's called basic training. She's right, of course, said Maria. For humans, not killing is the default. Thou shalt not kill. Law and theology just put it in writing. It was already in our biology. And sometimes something made that biology go haywire, she thought. But when she told Karski what she would need, he leaned back in his swivel chair, the list she'd prepared for him fluttering between his fingers. Thermal cycler, he read, electrophoresis chamber, Erlenmeyer's, Agarose, blah, blah, blah. Why can't you be like everyone else and just use a computer? Then he leaned forward, elbows on the desk, in a posture that struck Maria as simian. He crumpled up the list. You haven't generated any income. Director, she said, I can't generate anything without equipment. The genome, she said, no one else in the world is even trying. Karski shook his head. We don't want journal articles. We want something we can patent. It was clear she'd get nowhere telling him the most significant discoveries happened by chance just because someone was curious, because of an anomaly, because someone was troubled by something she couldn't explain. There is something we can sell, she said. I can milk the snakes for venom. This was exactly what she hadn't wanted to do. She intended to milk each rattler for enough to use for her own research, but on a regular basis, a commercial basis, too dangerous. You probably wouldn't die, but you were sure to lose at least a finger. Maria looked at her hands. She didn't play piano or guitar. Typing would be difficult, but you make sacrifices. When you milk a snake, you can't wear gloves. You need bare hands in order to grip and feel what you're doing. Maria loved her snakes, but there's no real love, she thought, without respect. They were used to her handling them, but only because they were used to getting a tasty rat in the feeding bin every time she lifted them out of their homes. Now she held the snake close to her body, gripped the head, and pressed it to the plastic film stretched over the funnel. The snake struck, fangs through film. This was a dangerous moment when you might startle and let go. Maria wouldn't startle, but she had to repress the sense of marvel that made her weak with joy. The snake doing what it was born to do. The babies were the most dangerous. They would pour the poison into you, holding nothing back. Adults, like this one, kept some venom in reserve, and now Maria pressed the venom glands, taking everything the snake had. The tail and body writhed against her in protest. What happened between them, she thought, was intimate and violent. And she thought for a moment of her grandmother, the women of her grandmother's generation, those sheltered and innocent, ignorant girls who went to their new husbands with no idea of what a man might want. What are you doing to me? The snake might ask. She was the one with the power, the control, for the time being, 10 fingers. Now, moving ahead immediately after 9/11, Maria switched on the radio, jumped around the dial through static till a man's voice boomed, "Back to the Stone Age, put him down like mad dogs." "Turn it off," said Emine. It was a normal reaction. That's why Emine didn't want to hear it. Round them up, torture them, kill them, make them suffer. It was what she thought when she was 14, though felt would express it better, such an overwhelming surge of fear and hate. It overtook her without conscious thought. She hadn't been in the synagogue. Her family never went, but her brain generated its own scenes, flashes of light, explosion, bodies blown to bits, washes of blood, the terrorists with machine guns and hand grenades who slaughtered Jews before blowing themselves up in Neve Shalom, the great synagogue of Istanbul. Why don't we do something? If we killed and killed, maybe the world would change back. Maybe she'd be sure again that when she walked, her feet would touch ground, that the earth would be there, secure to hold her up. Now the only certainty was his fear and rage, more solid and real than the world itself. It was an attack not only on Turkish Jews, but on Turkey itself, on everything she'd loved about her homeland. These outsiders, Islamic Jihad from Iran, evil dogs from Syria, the Palestinians we've made welcome here, they hate us. They hate our secular freedoms. Round them up, kill them all, attack their nests in Iran and Libya to protect us, to have revenge for all those bodies. There were arrests. So what? Prosecution, diplomats expelled. Her parents said the way to fight back was by strengthening ties with Europe, the rest of Europe, for Turkey to be a European country. During school vacations, she went to London to improve her English, to Switzerland to learn French, while her country, with its dangerous borders, handled things quietly, and she was powerless, and it enraged her that her country's power had such limits. Thank God we couldn't act on our rage, is what she thinks now. Thank God. And as the Muslims say, mashallah. We didn't recognize any limits here, did we? So I'm going to go ahead now so that you get to meet the man who ends up pursuing the characters you've just met. DeWitt Tesfaye smiled, which is what he always did to put strangers at ease. He thought Macmillan was a potential investor. They came through Manotick sometimes, usually better dressed. And though they sometimes spoke to him, an inconsequential question or two, this visitor said nothing, only looked at him a long time while listening to Dr. Avakian. Soon after they walked away, Tesfaye was called to the office. The man was seated behind Dr. Avakian's desk. "Close the door," he said. And once they were left alone, he showed a badge. "Have a seat. J.T. Macmillan, FBI." DeWitt's teeth started to chatter. They always used to when he was nervous. That had stopped after 9/11. He and Gladys had already known the evil human beings were capable of. And with the childlike Americans around them so overwhelmed with the knowledge, he took it upon himself to project an image of strength. After the attacks, he began to stand a little straighter. His voice was clear. He wanted to protect everyone, but it came across all wrong, as though he discovered pride because of the terrorist acts. "Take a deep breath," he told himself. It was probably about special registration, which would be a problem, yes, but he did have an explanation. He was an American citizen, had been naturalized as a boy, so he didn't think the new rules applied to him. And anyway, he wasn't sure which group he fell into. Born in Eritrea or maybe Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Somalia. He'd been born, he believed, for years in what was now Eritrea, but it hadn't been a country then. And later he learned he'd been born in a refugee camp. And there were so many stories, so many lies. He wasn't sure over which border, if any, or where. Somewhere in the Horn of Africa. Had his mother fled across the border with him already in her belly? Or was his tortured, murdered father not his father at all? She was raped in the camp. His father could have been one of those. His father could be anyone, Eritrean, Ethiopian, Somali, Arab. If she was raped in the camp, it was almost certainly more than once by more than one. What was printed on his documents most likely wasn't true, and this agent probably knew it. "Did I pronounce your name correctly?" DeWitt nodded. However anyone pronounced it, he always agreed. All that new confidence gone. Why couldn't he have been David Levy? If the Levys had formally adopted him, given him their name, none of this would be happening. But they'd insisted he retain his own culture. Bacteria have cultures. he thought at the time, but had been too timid and possibly grateful to say it aloud. The first round of registrations had been the Iranian men, hundreds detained and locked up without cause, unable to contact their families. When the second round started, Mar from the mailroom, with whom he'd never spoken before, asked, "Are you registering? Do you know if I have to?" "Where are you from?" "Palestine." Far be it from me, DeWitt thought, to tell the man his country isn't a country. But neither possibly was his own. "Master's in biochemistry," said Macmillan, "coursework in bacteriology, experienced in flow cytometry." He nodded. Could they possibly believe he would use biological weapons against his own people? Because that's what Americans were, his own. "And the work you're doing here?" "Cell biologist," he said, and I was appointed supervisor of lab safety protocols." "What about biosecurity?" Did this mean he hadn't been trusted? "I know about Asilomar, of course, but the languages you speak," said Macmillan. "English and I studied Spanish. I wouldn't call myself proficient. And I picked up a little French, vacations, conferences, and..." Obvious what the man wanted. "My mother tongue," he said, or more precisely, my mother's tongue was Tigrinya. "Don't they speak Arabic in Eritrea?" "Many people do," he said. He wanted to say, "I'm not an Arab, and not all Arabs are terrorists. We came to the US when I was very young. Then my mother died. She had killed herself. He had found her. He hardly remembered or didn't want to. I don't remember the language at all." DeWitt told himself, I've never given cause for complaint. He was okay as long as he could look at what he was doing instead of being looked at. Now, in the spotlight, he concentrated on the man's face. "Well," said Macmillan, "we'd hoped to find not just a scientist, but a linguist." Then he said, "Would you like to serve your country?" And I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you for listening.